Hey guys, Coach Chris here, back with another video, showing you my favorite way to combat the London system. This is a game I played today against a 21-22. So d4, d5, and whether they start bishop f4 or knight f3 doesn't matter. Going knight f6, now they develop the knight, e6, e3, bishop e7, knight bd2, castles. And what I love about this system is basically no matter what, White is going to play these London moves in some order. Doesn't matter at all. We play the same first 5 moves no matter what against the London. We occupy the center, play e6, get our knight developed, bishop e7, and castles. We do that every time. Doesn't matter the move order White chooses. Now at this point, White will either play c3 or develop the bishop right away. Again, doesn't matter. In this game, my opponent played bishop e2, which is a bit strange. Typically the bishop goes to d3, but again, it doesn't matter for our setup. I'm going b6 with the idea of trading off that bishop. So as early as move 3, we know that our light squared bishop is going to be the problem piece. And we also know that based on this pawn structure, White's light squared bishop is going to be their best piece. And so I just immediately aim to first get my king safe and then to trade off the light squared bishop. So bishop a6 supported by the knight. Now usually what I see the most is people take here, I recapture, and then queen e2, I drop the knight back and then bring it back to the center. In this game, White just castled, and so I was happy to take. Queen takes, knight bd7, and now, check it out. White's best piece is gone. My worst piece is gone. All my pieces make sense, and I'm ready to strike in the center. Now it's Black who has more central space, better minor pieces. This is just a great position. A3 from my opponent. I decided to take early on. In the London, White almost always recaptures with the e-pawn. The idea is to open up the e-file and to hope to generate some sort of attack. Maybe there's like a rook lift idea. But without a light squared bishop in the London, there is simply no attack. And so, based on this pawn structure, one possible plan is to get my queenside pawns on these squares to bust up this structure with the hope of eventually taking here, and when White recaptures, then there will be a backwards isolated pawn on the c-file. So that's one plan. So I start going for that. But after knight e5, there's a sort of semi-threat of going knight c6 and taking my dark squared bishop. I like my dark squared bishop in the structure. My pawns are on light squares. That means my dark squared bishop has more freedom of movement. It also helps support a b4 advance, so I don't want to trade that bishop. But I have a little bit less space for my pieces at the moment, and so I'm happy to trade off that active knight on e5. Maybe a better way of saying that is the knight on e5 is currently more active than the knight on d7, so it's a great trade. Bishop recaptures, and now I keep going with my plan. Now the knight could find its way into c4, which would be a fantastic square for the knight, pressuring this pawn, and if it ever moved to try to kick out the knight, then this pawn would hang. So that's one possible plan. I can still also play for the minority attack and try to bust up the structure on that side. But after knight f3, the e4 square is available, and so let's jump into it. So I jump in, rook ac1, don't really understand this one. I'm proactively defending c3, I guess, but I'm not really sure. I play f6. The London is all about White's light squared bishop and about control of e5. Well, now the light squared bishop is gone, and now I control e5. f6 kicking the bishop out and preventing the knight from jumping in. Queen to d7, this is an important move, protecting the pawn, connecting the rooks, and making it possible so that if white challenges the knight on e4, well, now I can take on g3 without dropping the pawn with check. So that's why queen d7 was important. Now black challenges my knight. I can take his dark squared bishop, mess up the pawn structure, and keep my fantastic dark squared bishop. In this position, my pieces are better, I have more central control, my bishop is going to dominate white's knight. This is just fantastic. So white's pawn on g3 was attacked, so he moved it forward. I developed my last piece, lining up with white's queen. White played b4. Now the idea of b4 is to sink a knight into c5, and then if ever I were to take, then after either pawn recapture, white will have a protected passed pawn, which could be very dangerous in an endgame. However, I have no intention of letting this game get to an endgame. My pieces are all super active. I've got the center. I'm about to blow it open, and with the queen and bishop battery, there are going to be some serious threats on the king side. This maneuver takes time and brings the knight away from where it's needed, which is to defend the king. So bishop c7, white follows through with the plan, knight b3, queen d6, threatening queen h7 check, and then once the king has to start coming this way, then my pawn breaks in the center, unleashing the rooks, are really gonna be felt. So rook f3, trying to basically create a flight square for the king, but this doesn't help. Queen h7 check. King needed to come to f2 to keep my bishop out of g3. So if the king had instead come here, well then this is very annoying, threatening checkmate. And again, at any time these pawns can blow open the position. So queen h2 check, king f2, and now the pawns are coming. So e5. It's interesting that the engine says that the best move is to take. Black is winning regardless, but white played the more human move, which is to sort of get off the file. But here I can play e4, and at first this looks a little counterintuitive. Wasn't the point to open up the position? Why are we closing it down? Well, the position isn't going to stay closed. The idea is we hit the rook, its only safe square is e3, and now I could win the exchange here. The rook's pinned to the queen, but I'm after much more than an exchange. And in that position, your rooks need open files to be active, and I was a little bit worried about if white somehow survives, which shouldn't really happen, but if white somehow survived, then an unassailable knight on c5 would be pretty annoying. And so I decided to keep it more complicated and, more importantly, make sure all my pieces are working and play f5. Now, it's the f file that I want open here because that's the file the king is on. White takes, I take with check, and now the king starts to run away. King e2, queen takes g2 with check, king goes back, and now there was probably a cleaner way to convert all this, but this seemed simple enough. So trade off with check and just bring the last piece into the attack. White's king is really just helpless here. So all my pieces are involved. Rook c2 hitting the queen, but I can just sidestep, taking a pawn. Now the threat is to bring the rook down here and win the queen. I thought white saw that, and that's why white played knight d2. Bringing pieces back to defend the king is correct. And now it's important to note that even if the attack doesn't immediately break through, these three passed pawns are just too much. One of them or all of them are going to queen, and black's going to win. But again, white really should not be surviving this position. Bishop f4, threatening to remove the defender of the f1 square, so something like takes, rook down here wins the queen. White played knight f1. I guess preparing rook h2 on a good day. I just dropped the bishop back, still eyeing the h2 square, and again opening up the threat to take here. White played rook e2 and just forgot or didn't see how the knight was hanging. And here white resigned. So 3 inaccuracies, 2 blunders from my opponent. Still a pretty solid 87% accuracy. But for me, no inaccuracies, no mistakes, no blunders, 97% accuracy. I really think that speaks to how simple and solid this little anti-London setup is. Again, my recommendation for you guys is to play something that you like against d4, and then against literally every other thing that white can throw at you. You just go for this setup. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Keep grinding those tactics.